I signed the papers, but they weren't the papers my daughter thought they were. My hands were steady as I pushed the folder across the mahogany table. Margaret smiled at me. That same warm smile she'd given me since she was 5 years old, when I'd taught her to ride her bicycle in front of our house in North Vancouver. The same smile she'd used when she asked to borrow my truck at 16. The same smile that had once meant safety, trust, love. Now I knew what it really meant. Richard, my business partner of 22 years, sat beside her. His hand rested on the small of her back, just barely visible beneath the edge of the conference table. They thought I couldn't see it. They thought a lot of things about me lately. That I was getting forgetful. That the business was too much for me to handle. That at 68, with my wife Eleanor gone 3 years now, I was lonely enough, confused enough, vulnerable enough to sign away everything I'd built. They were wrong. The thing about getting older is that people start to underestimate you. They see the gray hair, the reading glasses, the way you sometimes pause before speaking, and they think you're slipping. They don't realize you're just being careful. That you're watching. That 40 years of running a construction company across British Columbia and Alberta doesn't just disappear because you turned 65. Let me go back 6 months. Eleanor died in February 2022. Pancreatic cancer. 4 months from diagnosis to funeral. The kind of fast that doesn't give you time to prepare, even though everyone says there's no such thing as being prepared. Margaret was wonderful during that time. She took leave from her marketing job in Calgary to come stay with me in Vancouver. She organized the funeral, fielded the calls, made sure I ate. For 3 months, she was the daughter I'd always known. The girl who used to fall asleep on my lap during hockey games. The woman who'd stood up at Eleanor's funeral and talked about how her mother had taught her strength, grace, and the importance of family above all else. I should have known then. Eleanor had always been the one who saw through people. She'd warned me about Richard years ago, said there was something cold behind his smile. But Richard had been with me since the beginning, when I'd started Maxwell Construction with a single truck and a dream. He'd been my right hand, the operations manager who knew every job site, every client, every worker. I'd trusted him with everything except the final signature. That had always been mine. In May, Margaret said she wanted to come back to Vancouver permanently. Her job in Calgary wasn't fulfilling her anymore, she said. She missed being close to family, missed the ocean. Could she stay with me for a while? Just until she found her own place? Of course, I said yes. The house felt too empty anyway. 5 bedrooms for one old man seemed like a waste. And honestly, I was glad for the company. The nights were the hardest. Eleanor and I used to sit on the back deck, looking out at the mountains, talking about retirement plans we'd never get to fulfill. Now I sat there alone, with a glass of whiskey that tasted like grief. Margaret moved in that June. She brought 2 suitcases and a lot of enthusiasm about helping me with the business. She'd always shown interest before, asking questions about projects and contracts, but Eleanor had encouraged her to find her own path. Now, Margaret said, maybe it was time to bring that MBA she'd earned to good use. Maybe it was time to help her old dad with the paperwork that seemed to be piling up. I was grateful. Truly, I was. The business had grown beyond what I could easily manage alone. Richard handled operations, but the financial side, the strategic planning, the legal documents, all of that had always been split between Eleanor and me. Without her, I was drowning in paperwork. I didn't fully understand anymore. Tax laws had changed. Regulations had evolved. The world had moved faster than I'd kept up with. That's what I told myself anyway. July was when things started to feel off. Small things at first. Margaret suggesting I should sign some financial power of attorney documents, just in case anything happened. Richard mentioning at a job site meeting that maybe it was time to think about succession planning. Margaret finding mistakes in my accounting that she said she'd corrected for me. Richard saying that I'd forgotten a client meeting, though I was certain I'd never scheduled one. But I second-guessed myself. Maybe I was forgetting things. Maybe I was making mistakes. Grief does strange things to your mind, makes you doubt yourself. Everyone kept telling me I needed to take it easy, that I deserved rest, that I'd worked hard enough. Margaret started accompanying Richard to job sites. She said she was learning the business, understanding the operations side to complement her financial knowledge. They'd come home late, smelling like the cigarettes I knew Richard smoked, but Margaret swore she'd quit years ago. They'd pour themselves wine in my kitchen, laughing at inside jokes I wasn't part of, talking about projects and decisions in a language that felt designed to exclude me. One night in August, I came downstairs for water. It was past midnight. I had insomnia a lot those days. I heard voices from the living room, low, intimate. I stood in the hallway, hidden by the darkness, and I listened. "He's getting worse," Margaret was saying. "Did you see him today? He couldn't remember where he'd put the Morrison contract." "I put it in the wrong file," Richard replied. "He'll never figure that out." "How much longer do you think we need to wait?" "Not long. Dr. Harrison said he'd testify if needed. Early dementia, he'll say. The man barely knows his daughter anymore. Can't be trusted to run a multi-million-dollar company." There was a pause. Then Margaret's voice, so cold it didn't sound like her at all. "I just want this over with. I want us to be together properly. I want the business secured. And I want him somewhere safe where he can't interfere anymore. Patience, love, another month, maybe 2. We keep documenting his mistakes. We keep the Concerned Daughter Act going. And when we file for conservatorship, no judge will question it. Maxwell Construction becomes ours, legally, cleanly. And your father gets a nice room at Sunrise Gardens where they'll take excellent care of him." They kissed. I heard it. That soft sound that told me this wasn't new, wasn't sudden. This was planned, rehearsed. My daughter and my business partner, plotting to steal everything from me, to lock me away, to erase 40 years of my life like I was already a ghost. I went back upstairs without my water. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the bed I'd shared with Eleanor, and I tried to understand how I'd missed this. How long had they been together? How long had they been planning? Had Eleanor known? Is that why she'd been cold toward Richard those last few months? Why she'd suggested maybe it was time to retire, to sell the business, to travel while we still could? The next morning, Margaret made me breakfast. Scrambled eggs, bacon, toast with orange marmalade, just how I liked it. She smiled at me across the table. "How did you sleep, Dad?" "Fine," I said. "Just fine." And I began to plan. The thing they didn't know about me, the thing everyone seemed to have forgotten, is that I didn't build a successful construction business by being naive. You don't survive 40 years in this industry by trusting everyone at their word. You learn to watch for the tells. You learn to verify everything. You learn that the smile and the handshake mean nothing until the concrete's poured and the invoice is paid. I'd spent 40 years dealing with contractors who tried to overbill, clients who tried to underpay, suppliers who tried to shortchange. I'd navigated union disputes, zoning conflicts, permit delays, and every possible kind of human dishonesty. And they thought they could fool me? I called my lawyer the next day. Not the company lawyer. Richard would have heard about that. My personal lawyer, James Chen, who I'd known since he was fresh out of law school at UBC, and I'd given him his first case 35 years ago. I met him at a Tim Hortons in Burnaby, far from any place Margaret or Richard might see us. "I need you to do something for me," I said, "and I need it to be completely confidential." James listened as I laid it all out. Everything I'd overheard, everything I'd noticed, all the small manipulations and the large betrayals. His face remained professionally neutral, but I saw his jaw tighten when I mentioned Dr. Harrison. "Do you know for certain Harrison is involved?" James asked. "I've never been to a Dr. Harrison in my life," I said, "but I'm betting Richard knows someone who'll testify for money if needed. It's his style." "We need evidence," James said. "Everything you've told me is circumstantial, overheard conversation, suspicions. We need documentation. Then we'll get documentation." Over the next month, I played the part they expected. I became forgetful. I misplaced things. I asked the same questions twice. I struggled with names and dates. It wasn't hard to act confused. Some days, I almost convinced myself. But while I stumbled through my days, I was watching, recording, documenting. James had set me up with recording equipment, tiny devices that looked like pens or charging cables. I recorded conversations. I photographed documents that Margaret left on the kitchen table, thinking I couldn't understand them. I hired a private investigator, a woman named Sarah Kowalski, who'd done work for me years ago when I'd had suspicions about a foreman stealing materials. Sarah got photos, Margaret and Richard at restaurants in Vancouver, places they thought were discreet, Richard kissing Margaret outside her car in a parking garage. Text messages between them that Sarah's contact at a phone company was able to access. Messages about timelines and strategies and how much longer they'd need to keep up the act. The conservatorship papers showed up in late September. Margaret brought them to me on a Sunday morning, sitting beside me on the couch with tears in her eyes. "Dad, I know this is hard to hear," she said, "but Richard and I are worried about you. You've been forgetting things, making mistakes at work. We think maybe it's time to let us help more formally. These papers just give me legal authority to help manage things if you're having trouble. It's for your protection." I looked at the papers. Legal guardianship, conservatorship, control of all financial decisions. The house, the business, the bank accounts. Everything would be in Margaret's name, with Richard as secondary authority. "I don't understand," I said, playing my part. "Why do I need this?" "You're just getting older, Dad. It happens to everyone. We want to make sure you're taken care of." "Where would I live?" "Well, we've been looking at Sunrise Gardens. It's a beautiful facility in West Vancouver. Assisted living. You'd have your own apartment, nurses on staff, activities. You'd be safe there. But I want to stay in my house." "I know, Dad, but the house is too much for you now. And once Richard and I are married, we'll need space for our family. This way, everyone gets what they need." So they were engaged. They'd probably been planning a wedding with my money, in my house, after they'd locked me away. I felt the rage rise in my throat, hot and bitter, but I swallowed it down. "Married?" I said. "You and Richard?" She smiled. That same warm smile. "Yes, Dad. I know it might seem sudden, but we've grown very close working together. He loves me. He wants to take care of me. And he'll take care of you too, through the business." "I need to think about this," I said. Her smile faltered. "Dad, there's not a lot of time. We have a court date next week. The judge wants to see that you agree this is best for you." "Court date?" "Just a formality. To make the conservatorship official." "I see." I signed nothing that day. She left the papers on the coffee table, looking frustrated. After she went upstairs, I photographed every page and sent them to James. That night, I made a decision. I could have confronted them then, could have thrown them out, fired Richard, cut Margaret off, but that wouldn't have been enough. They'd tried to steal my life from me. They'd plotted to imprison me, to erase my autonomy, to take everything I'd built. They deserved more than just failure. They deserved consequences. The court date was October 12th, a Thursday morning at the Vancouver courthouse. Margaret dressed me in a suit that morning, straightening my tie like I was a child. Richard picked us up in his BMW. They were both so confident, so certain this was already done. In the car, they talked about their plans for the business, expanding into Alberta more aggressively, taking on commercial projects they'd always thought were too risky, selling off the equipment I'd carefully maintained and buying new. Everything I'd built, reimagined in their vision. We arrived at the courthouse at 9. James was already there, standing in the hallway outside the courtroom. Margaret looked surprised to see him. "Dad, why is James here?" "He's my lawyer," I said. "Shouldn't I have my lawyer at something like this?" She exchanged a glance with Richard. "I thought we discussed this. I'm representing your interests. I'm capable of having my own lawyer," I said. "Or am I too far gone for that?" We entered the courtroom. Judge Catherine Morrison, presiding, a woman I'd never met but James said was known for her skepticism of conservatorship cases. She'd seen too many cases of family members trying to take advantage of elderly relatives. The proceedings began. Richard and Margaret's lawyer, a slick man named David Park, presented their case. Documents showing my supposed deterioration. Testimony from Margaret about my forgetfulness, my confusion, my inability to manage basic tasks. A statement from Dr. Harrison, who I'd never met, asserting that I showed signs of early dementia and lacked the capacity to make sound financial decisions. Judge Morrison listened. She asked questions. She looked at me several times, studying my face. I sat quietly, letting them build their case, letting them feel confident. Then it was James's turn. "Your Honor," he said, "I'd like to present evidence that this conservatorship petition is not about protecting Mr. Maxwell, but about stealing from him." Margaret's face went pale. Richard leaned forward, whispering urgently to Park. James presented it all. The photos of Margaret and Richard together, the text messages discussing their strategy, the recordings of their conversations in my living room, the financial analysis showing that Margaret had already begun siphoning money from business accounts she'd gained access to, the investigation into Dr. Harrison, revealing he'd been paid $15,000 by Richard for his testimony and had never actually examined me. "Furthermore, Your Honor," James continued, "I've arranged for Mr. Maxwell to undergo a comprehensive cognitive evaluation by an independent psychiatrist, Dr. Ellen Reeves, at Vancouver General Hospital. Her report, submitted to the court yesterday, shows that Mr. Maxwell has no signs of dementia, no cognitive impairment, and full capacity to manage his affairs." He handed the report to the judge. "I'd spent 4 hours with Dr. Reeves the week before, taking every test she could give me, answering every question. She'd been thorough, professional, and her conclusion was clear. I was completely competent." Judge Morrison read the report. She looked at the photos, she read the transcripts of the recorded conversations. Her expression grew colder with each page. "Miss Maxwell," she said, "Mr. Thornton, do you have anything to say to these allegations?" Margaret was crying. Real tears this time, but not the tears of a concerned daughter. These were tears of fear, of someone watching their plan collapse. "Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding," she stammered. "My father, he's paranoid. He's imagining things. Those recordings are taken out of context." "The context," Judge Morrison said icily, "appears to be that you and Mr. Thornton are engaged in a conspiracy to defraud your father of his business and assets." Richard stood up. "Your Honor, I can explain." "Sit down, Mr. Thornton." He sat. Judge Morrison turned to me. "Mr. Maxwell, I apologize that you've had to endure this. The conservatorship petition is denied. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the Vancouver Police Department for investigation into possible fraud, conspiracy, and elder abuse." She banged her gavel. It was over. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Margaret tried to talk to me. Richard had already disappeared, probably calling his own lawyer. She grabbed my arm, her face desperate. "Dad, please. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I love you. We can fix this." I looked at her. This woman who had Eleanor's eyes and my determination. This woman I'd raised, taught, loved. This woman who'd tried to steal my life. "No," I said. "We can't." I walked away. James followed me out to his car. We drove in silence for a while. Finally, he spoke. "What are you going to do about the business?" "Fire Richard," I said, immediately. "I've already drafted the termination papers. Security is removing him from all job sites as we speak." "And Margaret?" I was quiet for a long moment. "She's still my daughter, but she's not welcome in my home, and she's not in my will. Everything goes to charity now. The SPCA, the Cancer Research Foundation, the organizations Eleanor cared about. Let Margaret make her own way in the world, like I had to. That's generous, considering. It's what Eleanor would have wanted. She always said family was about more than blood. It's about trust, respect, love. Margaret lost all of that." The police investigation took 3 months. Richard was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and attempted theft. He took a plea deal, 18 months in prison and restitution. Dr. Harrison lost his medical license. Margaret wasn't charged criminally. The Crown said there wasn't quite enough evidence, but she became radioactive in Vancouver's business community. Nobody would hire her after word got out about what she'd tried to do. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she and Richard's relationship fell apart almost immediately. Turns out a relationship built on greed and betrayal isn't very stable when the money disappears. I sold Maxwell Construction in March of this year. Got a good price from a competitor who'd always wanted to expand into BC. I didn't need the business anymore, didn't need the stress. The sale came with conditions. All my employees kept their jobs. Full benefits maintained. I made sure of that. They'd been loyal to me for years. They deserved better than to be pawns in someone else's game. Now I live alone in my house in North Vancouver. I've turned Eleanor's garden into something beautiful again, spending hours out there with the roses she loved. I volunteer at the community center, teaching basic business skills to new immigrants who want to start their own companies. I have coffee every Tuesday with James, talking about books and politics and the Canucks' chances this season. I don't have a daughter anymore. That's the hard truth I wake up to every morning. Margaret sends emails sometimes, long apologetic messages that I don't read. She calls on my birthday and Christmas, but I don't answer. Maybe that makes me cruel. Maybe I should forgive her, let her back into my life. But every time I think about it, I remember that night I stood in the hallway listening to her plan my imprisonment. I remember how easily she lied to my face. I remember the coldness in her voice when she talked about getting me out of the way. Some betrayals are too deep to heal. I'm 69 now. I've got good years left, God willing. I plan to spend them on my terms, with my autonomy intact, surrounded by people who value me for who I am and not what I can give them. I've learned that trust is fragile, that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, and that the person who smiles at you across the breakfast table might be planning your downfall. But I've also learned that I'm stronger than people think, that getting older doesn't mean getting weak, that I can still fight for myself, still outthink those who underestimate me, still protect what I've built. Last week, I had coffee with Sarah Kowalski, the private investigator who helped me. She mentioned she'd seen Margaret working as a barista at a Starbucks in Surrey, making minimum wage, living in a basement suite. Part of me felt satisfaction at that. The daughter who'd wanted millions, reduced to scraping by. But mostly I just felt sad. Sad for the little girl who used to hold my hand. Sad for the woman who'd thrown away everything real for something as empty as money. Sad for the life we could have had together, if only she'd valued love more than greed. I finished my coffee and went home to my empty house. I sat on the back deck, looking at the mountains, and I thought about Eleanor. She'd known. Somehow, she'd known. Maybe that's why she'd tried to get me to sell the business, to simplify our lives. Maybe she'd seen the danger coming and tried to steer me away from it. I wish she was there to see how it ended, to know that I'd protected what we built, that I hadn't let them win. But I think, somehow, she knew. Eleanor always knew. I raised my glass to the sunset, to the mountains, to the memory of my wife and the ghost of my daughter, and I made myself a promise. I would live the rest of my life on my own terms. I would be careful about who I trusted, but I wouldn't become bitter. I would protect myself, but I wouldn't close myself off from the world. I would remember that I was James Maxwell, builder, businessman, survivor, and nobody, not my daughter, not my partner, not anyone, would ever take that away from me again. The papers I'd signed that day in the courthouse weren't the ones Margaret thought they were. They were new articles of incorporation, separating my personal assets from the business completely. They were updated power of attorney documents, naming James as my representative if I ever truly did become incapable. They were the legal framework to protect myself from ever being vulnerable again. I'd learned my lesson. I'd switched the documents. And this time, I'd made sure I was the only one holding the pen.